This is a video in the Core GIS Services series. In a previous video, I showed you how to create and install Linux in a virtual machine. And if you haven't looked at that, I suggest you start with that video, because then we will go through how to set up a virtual server using VirtualBox. And in this episode, we will continue on that work. And we will create a new clone of this server, and we will install PostGIS on it. So you can use PostGIS geodatabase in QGIS. So the first thing to do is to clone this server, and I will call it PostGIS as a name. Everything will be, as usual, the same as it is with the original server. A full clone. And it will take a minute or two. In the meantime, I'll switch to a browser. PostGIS, that is the geospatial extension to PostGIS server. So PostgreSQL. So PostgreSQL is an open source geodatabase, but it doesn't have a spatial data type. So in order to store geospatial data in the database, you use PostGIS. And QGIS is actually from the start built to manage PostGIS data. So that is one of the main reasons why it was created in the first place. So when our server has been cloned, we will install it. We will start the server, connect to it using SSH, and start installing the PostGIS server. So let's just wait for this to complete. And we can minimize that window and that window. And let's start a terminal. So let's SSH with the user we created for the server at the IP address for the server. And the password for the user on the server. And we're in. Let's check for updates. We don't have to, but sudo apt update. Yep, we're up to date. As before, we will install using the apt package manager, and that requires elevated privileges. So we will start by the command sudo apt install PostGIS, and that should be enough. And it will go through that the requirements for PostGIS and add additional packages that is required for it to work. So now it downloads all the packages, and when that is done, it will start installing the packages on the server. So when that is done, let me clear that window. We have PostGIS installed, but we need to set up a few things. for it to work. So first of all, the installation has created a default database, and it's not recommended to use that database for PostGIS. So we will start by creating a new database, and the installation has also added a user called PostGIS. So the first to do is probably to set a new password for that user. So sudo password PostGIS. And you can set any password you want for that user. Like that. Next step, we need to get into the PostgreSQL console using this user, Postgres user. So sudo the user PostGIS, and we want to access the console, and that's a software that we start with PSQL. So with elevated privileges, using the username PostGIS, we wish to start the console for the SQL server. Okay, home geo, we need to change the permissions. So let's quit and change ownership. I probably should create a new tablespace. So let's create a new directory. Sudo make directory in the root folder called geodata or geodb, geodatabase. We change ownership for that. Change ownership to PostGIS user, and the geodb folder. I think I need to change the group as well. So sudo change group PostGIS geodb. Now let's try the previous command again. Permission denied. Okay, we will try to create a table space in the new location instead. So we will start by perhaps setting a password for the internal PostGIS user. The other PostGIS user is the operating system PostGIS user. It might sound confusing, but anyway, it doesn't have to be the same password here. And if it's a production environment, it's probably shouldn't be the same password. And then we will create a new table space for the new location. So create table space, and we call that TS location at geodb, and end with a semicolon. And we get a response that is created, and we need to create a database in that with that table space. So create database. Let's call the database geodata with table space TS semicolon. Now we have created the database. Now we need to open a new console, PostGIS console in that database. So \Q to quit. And just to check that everything is okay, we can ls, that the list command, probably with sudo ls and the GODB folder, and we have something there. That is a sign that it worked. So we have something in that folder, and that is probably the database that we just created. So sudo user postgres psql, but we target the database geodata that we just created. And I'm not sure why this keeps popping up. I'm just going to ignore it for now. If somebody has a clear answer to why this is showing up, leave a comment and help others. I will probably try to find out after this video, and if I do, I will comment myself. Anyway, now we have our geodatabase. That is not the default Postgres database, and we can create our PostGIS extensions here. And on the PostGIS webpage, let's do it like this. We have the commands that we need to issue for this. So create extension PostGIS semicolon. That creates the extension. So let's give that command. Create extension PostGIS semicolon. It is written here in capital letters. I'm pretty sure you don't have to. It created the extension. Then we need to create a new extension if we want to be able to store raster data. So create extension PostGIS raster semicolon. Yep. And if we want to use topology, we need to create an extension for that. That. And you can do add more extensions based on what you need. On the page you have instructions for how to upgrade to a new version in the database, and you do that inside the console, as I showed you previously here. But I don't think we need to do much more inside the console. There are some things we need to do outside it. So \Q. We need to make it possible to access the database from a computer on the network. And in order to do that, we need to edit a few files. So let me just check here. To edit the settings, we are going to use a text editor that is built into Linux. That's called Nano. So with elevated privileges, sudo nano, and the file is on the path etc. PostgreSQL 14 main, and I think it's one of the files is pghba.conf. So in my case it is the version 14. If you have another version of PostGIS, it will be a different path, but it's in the etc folder, PostGIS, and then the version number, main, and you have a file called pg_hba.conf. So this is one of the configuration files, and we are looking in this for some information to change. Let's see. Now we are closing in. IP version 4, host all, etc. We will add a row that's called host all, and the IP address 192.168.01/24. And the method, we could say MD5, I guess. I think we can say MD5. Let's save that with Control O, enter, and exit out, Control X. The other file we need to edit is called PostGIS.conf in the same location. And we are scrolling. And this row that says lesson addresses, remove the hashtag and replace localhost with a specific IP address or just a star. Then the server will listen to IP addresses anywhere. So save as with Control O, enter, Control X to exit. Now we need to restart the PostGIS service. So sudo service PostgreSQL restart. Sudo service PostgreSQL restart. Like that, and hopefully we're done. So let's open QGIS. And in the browser, there's a section with PostgreSQL. And if you right-click that, you can set up a new connection. And we'll call this vert GODB. You can call it anything. The host is the IP address. The port, we leave that at the default. The database, we created a database called geodata. And authentication, we can use the basic. And the user, PostGIS. With the user password. And we can test the connection, and it worked. It's not optimal to use the database administrator account for this. You should use set up a specific user group and users that you for a database like this. But since this is mostly for experimentation on a local machine, it is fine to use this, because nobody else will use the database. But if you are setting up a PostGIS database for your organization, you should research it a bit more and create user groups and permissions and all that things. I will store this login in the connection, so I don't have to do it again. I want to be able to create projects in the database, so I will add that. Otherwise, I think that's okay. So, okay, saving passwords, yes. And now under PostGIS we have a new virtual geodatabase connection. So here I can create a new scheme, for instance test, and in that one I can create a new table, and it could be points, and I might want to have some fields for that. You can do whatever you want here, but it should be a point, geometry column, and it should have a projection, a spatial index. Yeah. Okay, now we have something. Let's add a base map. If you haven't watched the Web ODM core services video, you can do that, but I will just add an orthophoto from that result to use as my base map, and I want to create points on this bridge in my PostGIS database. So add the points layer and edit that, add a point on bridge center. And that is the text for auto-generating the ID for the feature, and call this bridge. Like that. Save, close. So that wasn't too hard. It was a few commands that was required in the setting up of the server, but after that you can do more or less everything administration wise from QGIS, either in the browser directly or the database manager. There are talks about what should happen with this database manager, and we'll see. But for now you can do a lot of things here in the database manager. For instance, you can import files, shape files or whatever. Let's try and import the camera positions from the Web ODM. See, it was river shots GeoJSON, and we should put it in the test scheme, and we create a table called river shots, primary key, geometry column. Everything here is default. The source is WGS84. I want the target to be UTM, encoding UTF, yeah. Should be fine. like that. Let's try it. Yep, imported, successful. Refresh. Refresh. Ah, there we go. Here we have it. And we can probably add it. Yep. And we can query the layer. So that is all I intended to show you, how to set up a PostGIS database server that you can use with QGIS. The simple thing is to just create new schemes in the database, new tables, and use it for vector data. In order to load a raster data into the PostGIS database, there may be a way through QGIS, but I've usually used the command line for it. There is a command called raster2pgsql that you can use. It loads GDAL supported raster formats into PostGIS raster table. It's a complex command with a lot of settings and options, but I rarely do it, so when I need it, I usually just Google how to do it. So there is a possibility to load it, and PostGIS is a GIS in itself as well. So you can use virtual layers and connect with an SQL command to the database, and in the query that you send to the server, you can process the data before it ever reaches QGIS client. So you can do buffers, a lot of things directly from the query that you are sending to the server. So the response you get is not all the data, it's a response to the query that you are sending. So you are offloading a lot of processing power to the server. In this case, it's not really useful since the server is on the same hardware. But if you had a dedicated PostGIS server, it could offload calculation power or processing power from your clients to the server. Yeah. So with this, I hope that you can follow along and create a PostGIS server that you can use for testing purposes and learning. And so I think that's all for this time. I think that was all I wanted to show you. So see you next time.